Carl Sagan said, "We make our world significant by the courage of our questions and by the depth of our answers." With that in mind, I'm going to ask you a few questions. How's your health? How's your finances? How's your family? Are you happy? Those are some pretty heavy-duty questions that many of us are afraid to ask, and even more of us are probably afraid to answer. Excellent people aren't afraid to ask these questions. In fact, they're constantly asking themselves those questions, and probably many more. Excellent people aren't afraid to answer those questions either. Excellent people are aware of what's going on around them and inside them. Eckhart Tolle is known for saying, "Awareness is the greatest agent for change." That's because it's only after we become consciously aware of our situation that we can begin to change it. What is awareness? Awareness is basically consciousness. Consciousness of a great many things. Is being awake the same thing as being conscious? No. There's more to being conscious than just being awake. You must be aware. You must notice that which is going on around you and inside you. The world is full of people who are wide awake, yet they aren't the least bit conscious. Why is that? 3 reasons. Reason number 1, we live in a world that encourages us to not notice what's going on. From an early age, we're taught to not stand out from the crowd. Reason number 2, it's much easier to be blissfully ignorant than it is to be aware. Like anything of value, being conscious requires a great deal of work. Reason number 3, if you're unaware of that which goes on around you, then you don't have to deal with it. It's easier to ignore issues than it is to deal with them. There's just one problem. You can't improve anything if you don't even realize the situation is less than ideal, or if you're not willing to admit that the situation is less than ideal. I've seen those 2 problems over and over and over when working with my clients. They're reluctant to tell it like it is. And then once they finally begin to tell it like it is, they're reluctant to make permanent adjustments to address what they've learned. I'll admit that I've been guilty of this myself on way too many occasions. Fortunately, most of those occasions are in the past, which is where they belong, in my rearview mirror. All too often, we consciously or unconsciously choose to stick our heads in the sand and refuse to face the reality that confronts us. Why do we do this? The main reason is fear. All too often, we're afraid to face reality because if we did, we might not like what we see. So many people live within unhappy circumstances and yet will do little or nothing to change their situation. They're afraid of stepping outside of their comfort zones. There's just one problem. Most of the magic that occurs in our lives happens when we become brave enough to step outside our comfort zones. They've been conditioned to live a life of security and conformity. This security and conformity may give them peace of mind, but in reality, nothing is more damaging to their spirit. Quite often, a desire to play it safe and to blend in with the crowd will hold us back and stop us from moving forward towards the potential of the fantastic things we are capable of achieving. But fear isn't always a bad thing. There are 2 kinds of fear: justifiable fear and unjustifiable fear. Fear of sticking your hand in a fire is justifiable fear. That fear keeps you from getting burned. On the flip side, fear of pulling your head out of the sand and examining your life is unjustified fear. It doesn't protect you. It doesn't serve you. Instead, it holds you back. Well, it's time to begin facing your fears and to begin examining your life and all that you are. Or as Socrates put it nearly 2,500 years ago, the unexamined life is not worth living. Well, guess what? It's time for you to start living. But before we can truly get started, we need to take a good hard look at ourselves and everything around us. This leads us to concept number 1 and its first part, until number 1. Until number 1 states, until we start telling it like it is and then begin adjusting our actions accordingly, we will never achieve our maximum potential and evolve as a species. What does this mean? It means exactly what we've been talking about. It means that if you want to have any major lasting successes, you need to figure out and then accept what's going on around you and inside of you, and then beginning to make appropriate changes based upon what you've learned. To state it even more plainly, it means it's time for you to get your head out of the sand and your rear end off the couch. If you don't, you're not going to get where you want to be. In essence, until number 1 describes the problems most all of us face at one time or another in our lives. Chief among those problems is an unwillingness to accept what's going on around us and inside of us, and a preference to live in denial. Now that we've described the problem, it's time to ask, what's the solution? The solution can be found in law number 1, the law of actuality, which states, no living person or system can remain in existence for very long without first having arrived at a level of full, realistic awareness of their own existence, sensations, thoughts, and surroundings, and then responding accordingly after having done so. Note that law number 1 is a 2-part solution. First, you must arrive at a level of full, realistic awareness of your existence, your sensations, your thoughts, and your surroundings. In other words, you must take a cold, hard look at yourself, even if you're afraid of you might not like what you see. If you're mean, the only way for you to become kind is to first admit that you're mean. If you're stubborn, the only way for you to become flexible is to first admit that you're stubborn. If you're dishonest, the only way for you to become honest is to first admit that you're dishonest. If you're a less than ideal spouse or a less than ideal parent, the only way for you to get better is to first admit that you've been less than ideal. If your finances aren't so hot, the only way for you to improve your financial situation is to first admit they're not so hot. If you eat too much unhealthy food, the only way for you to improve your eating habits is to first admit that what you've been eating isn't getting you where you want to be. If you drink too much and it's having a negative impact on your life, the only way for you to improve is to first admit you've got a problem. Once you've taken a long, cold, hard look at yourself, it's time for step 2. That step is responding accordingly as a result of what you've learned from your self-examination. The remaining 19 concepts in the way of excellence will help you do just that. Just think, if we all would incorporate law number 1, the law of actuality, into our lives, we would be creating a society where its members truthfully and accurately assess and acknowledge their situations, and as a result, begin acting appropriately. If we all did that, it'd be a heck of a lot more enjoyable to check out the news every day. In my experience, life is a lot simpler than we make it out to be. I believe most of life can be summed up with one simple question. Are you happy? Either you are or you're not. If you're happy, then I suggest you keep right on doing what you've been doing. But if you're not, then something needs to change. It's just that simple. If you like these videos, please be sure to click the subscribe so you can subscribe to our channel, and be sure to click the notification bell so that you'll be notified when we post each and every video on Monday, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays.